Hey, this is Sam Tai from the Ranks FC podcast, and you are watching Chasing Green Arrows. So I did pretty well in game week 1, to be honest. And after getting 80 points, I was a little bit reluctant to play my limitless chip. But I'd had a look at how many different chips you get and like how many opportunities you get to play them, which just isn't that many. And then you take into account how many free transfers you get later down the line when the knockout stages start. And I figured that game week 2 had to be the time to play the limitless chip because I had no idea what's going to happen in game week 3. Those teams that have already qualified start to rotate and rest their players, and that just becomes a total nightmare. So I figured game week 2 is the best opportunity to second guess managers and figure out who's going to play. So after scoring 80 points, I set myself a very high bar, but here's what I went for. I took Jordan Pickford and John Stones from England, assuming a clean sheet against Scotland. I went for Spinazzola, Insigne, and Berardi. So I went 3s up on Italy, knowing that they would probably smash Switzerland. And that came in quite nicely, Spinazzola and Berardi specifically. I took a little bit of a gamble with Belgium. Obviously, Lukaku's not a gamble. Meunier was brilliant in game week 1. But I decided to stick Eden Hazard in. So as we record, we don't know how that's gone. But I decided to take one gamble because limitless, well, you just get unlimited cash, don't you? Midfield continues with Pogba, who I thought was amazing, absolutely amazing against Germany. And I'm convinced in the role he plays for France, he's going to back a couple of goals. Wijnaldum, too, is seemingly the Netherlands' biggest goal threat. Harry Kane up front, Mbappe and Lukaku. No way you could afford all three of those guys on a regular budget, but that's the beauty of Limitless. And I took another punt as well with Zeki Çelik from Turkey, but that didn't work out so well. So we just push him aside, we drop him to the bench, and Lucas Hernandez from France comes in. So I've got 3 France, I've got 3 Italy, I've got 3 Belgium, I've got 3 England. So I think you can see what I think is going to happen in game week 2. And unfortunately, I'll have to say goodbye to this absolute all-star team when it comes back to game week 3. But that's when I plan to use my wild card and try to figure out exactly who's going to get a rest and who's going to get a go in game week 3. I don't know yet. We have to figure out what happens in the next few games, but that's tomorrow's problem. Today I'll just look at my limitless team. Yeah, I can't. So basically, the problem is it's difficult to think of the knockout stage right now in the middle of game week 2 because game week 3 is there. So that's where I'm going to try and use my wild card. And then once that's happened, I'm going to try and second guess the knockout stages. Now, the thing is, if you use a limitless, you change your team entirely. Then you use a wild card for game week 3, you change your team entirely. And then you get unlimited free transfers heading from the group stage into the round of 16. So what I'm actually doing is running out 3 completely different teams week after week after week. And if you're given that luxury, which this game does give you, you basically have to try and plot your teams based on those fixtures and those fixtures alone. So my limitless team has triple stacked on England and France and Belgium. And that's because I think they're going to win their games. And I think they've got really favorable fixtures. And so I'm going to have to look at the same thing for the wild card, whilst also taking into account which of the stars get rested for game week 3 ahead of the knockouts, because every previous tournament we've ever had has told you that that will definitely happen. And I distinctly remember in the World Cup in 2018 that France, they rotated pretty heavily for their game week 3 fixture because they'd already qualified, and then they brought the big guns back in for the round of 16. So moving into that round of 16, I guess it's probably time to start thinking about which teams go all the way, because you get a number of changes you can make round after round, but ultimately you don't want to be chopping and changing it too much. I think this is the point at which you basically key in on those teams and you start to look at players that you can have now, but for the next 2 or 3 game weeks as well. So how you figure that out is quite simple. You ask yourself who you think is going to win the Euros, and you look at the bracket and you look at how the last 16 teams meet up, and you ask yourself, who do you think is going to meet each other in the final? And you take 3 players from each of those teams, and who do you think can make a run to the semis? Who's got a nice soft round of 16 game? And we take a look at it, and I mean, it kind of feels like Italy are going to go ahead and meet Ukraine in the round of 16. I think Belgium are going to end up playing a 3rd place team as well. So Italy, Belgium remain in play for me. So you start picking your players from there. And you've got Berardi, you've got Spinazzola, you've got Insigne, Lukaku, obviously, Meunier, depending on how he gets on. And then you start to figure out who is Hazard fit? Is Kevin De Bruyne fit? What do they look like when they come back as well? So I'd say that's the strategy. And I'm looking at Italy, Belgium, France, Spain, and Portugal as the 5 teams that I think will probably make the quarterfinals. and the other three I'm not so sure about. So those are the teams that I'm going to try and take 2 or 3 players from in each scenario to try and give myself the best chance of not having to make too many changes later on. A lot of this is tied to selection. So typically speaking, I would much prefer to take a fullback on a strong side. So in game week 1, for example, I took Rafa Guerreiro from Portugal, and I got a bit lucky with the goal, but I think the clean sheet was probably never in question. But you maximize your opportunity to score points there by taking a defender who's eligible for that clean sheet bonus, but can also get forward and score. And Zinchenko has ended up in the wrong category for Ukraine because he plays as an attacking midfielder for Ukraine. He's an 8, almost verging on a number 10 at points, and he's listed as a defender. So he's almost like double eligible. He's a bit of a cheat code there. But you're also battling selection dilemmas. So in England's case, over the course of the group stages, I mean, it's been very difficult to tell exactly who Gareth Southgate would pick. You know, he calls up like 6 fullbacks. Who's he going to take? And of course, game week 1 against Croatia, we end up with 2 right backs on the pitch and no left back. So I wouldn't have blamed you if you thought Luke Shaw was going to start that game and be England's primary left back, but he wasn't. And it makes it really difficult. So naturally, I want that attacking fullback who's eligible for the clean sheet, but probably has more of a chance of getting a goal. I take that over a centre back coming up for a corner every day. I think it's just far more likely that that player will get an attacking return. However, if you're not really sure who's going to be picked, like in England's case, then you can go for the safer bet, which is usually the centre back, because managers don't really tend to mess around with the chemistry and the partnership of the centre backs as much. They tend to pick 2, and unless they get injured, that's the 2. So in England's case here, I've taken John Stones because I think John Stones will play every game if he's fit. I cannot possibly say the same about any of the other defenders. So it's a battle, and you have to see what the threat is for the manager in question, and how likely it is that player is going to get an attacking return. And I'd say fullbacks every day of the week are surely more likely. So there's probably value in picking a couple of teams that you think can get to the quarterfinals but aren't quite as fancied as the others. Naturally, they come with a cheaper price tag, so they're more affordable. And if you can hop onto them and hold on to them for 2 or 3 weeks and they can do the business for you, that can be a differential for you in your league. So let's put France and Belgium and England and Portugal aside and take a look at teams that you think, okay, they could probably play 5 games in this tournament, and that gives me an opportunity. And their players are naturally a little bit cheaper. And Ukraine are probably one of those. So Yarmolenko has already bagged a couple, and Malinovsky is probably the one you want to jump on now. He's missed a penalty. He's got an assist. I don't think he's hit his potential just yet. I think he's going to continue into the knockout stages. And Malinovsky is a hell of a long shooter. And one of the weird kinks of this game is that you get an extra point for a goal outside the box. It's worth 1 point more, which for Malinovsky is the dream scenario because that's all he ever does. He just shoots from outside the box. But the other team I like, I've picked 2 teams that play in yellow and blue. Maybe it's just my colours, but I like Sweden too. I think Sweden are going to finish second in their group, and I think they're going to make it into the knockout stages. And look, it becomes quite tough from there, but they are incredibly difficult to break down. So if we take the previous formula and we look at a defender who is eligible for that clean sheet bonus, but gets forward and is probably eligible for those attacking returns, if possible, I think it's probably Ludvig Augustinsson from Sweden. And of course, the player that didn't score against Spain, but lit everyone's eyes up was Alexander Isak, who I think, I mean, I haven't been bold enough to pick him just yet, but I'm convinced that he's going to get a couple of goals and start to wake people up a little bit. And if Sweden do make it into the knockout stages, it's going to be because he scores, because no one else on that team is really going to score. And that guy is really, really good. So in terms of slightly cheaper options, I'd look at Malinovsky, Isak, and Augustinsson there as a midfielder, a forward, and a defender for you to consider.